that the tool and our platform is kind of good at talking about like what can be done. So I'm gonna keep these opening remarks really brief. As I said, we're quite a small but growing team out of Helsinki, Finland, and we think we're on a very, very exciting no-code journey, especially when it comes to kind of like creating a, how would I say, more professionally oriented no-code platform. I think it would be a nice way of putting that. So the things that you're going to see, and depending if you're familiar with the platform or not, I'm just going to assume you're not and go from the very, very basics. And but what you're going to see is that we've kind of strive to build an environment where you can really do complicated and challenging things while keeping it as simple as possible. So it's a bit more like less like Duplo and more like Lego with our tool. That's kind of like how I like to think about it. And let's see if there's anything more to say about Appgyver. Well, that's pretty much it. No, we're very, very excited and very small team. And if you join us on our forums and on the platform, you will notice that we're quite easy to reach and quite eager to kind of talk to people. So definitely, if you have any questions now or after this presentation, like just I'll give you my Twitter and email and especially the company email later. You can send in questions and things, and we'll be happy to answer them. Yeah, so I think I'll try to let's see how the screen sharing works, and then I can put up the let's see. I don't usually work in Zoom, so it's always a bit exciting when doing this. Okay, so you should be seeing on the left we have the platform, and on the right there's my phone is screen mirrored there, so you should be seeing that. And I'm gonna assume you're not seeing the Zoom elements on the right, right?
No, you're
yeah, it's just a screen. Okay, perfect. Okay, so when you sign up with our platform at appgyver.com, and then you just enter your name and email address and the usuals, then where you end up is the main view of our platform, which is at platform.appgyver.com. And here, what I've done is basically I've just pressed create new app, and if I would go back one step, then you would see my huge messy list of all the applications that I work on like daily to make examples and things, but we're not going to go there. But anyway, this is the main view, and this is the default view that you get after pressing create new application. And I guess it's good to talk a little bit about like what's going on here. So the way the platform works is that we have the platform itself and the editing UI and the editing tool. This all of here on the browser is called Composer Pro, which is how you create Appgyver applications. And on the right here, mirrored here, is the Appgyver Preview App, which is an app which is available on iOS and Android, and it takes whatever you do here in Composer Pro, and then it builds it into a native application for either of the platforms using React Native under the hood. So what you're seeing on the right is like a first order native application, and that's also what you'll after you've completed working, then you'll be able to use the build tools to build the actual binaries for iOS and Android. But I don't think we're going to go to that in our 1 hour time slot. So we're going to spend time doing some apps before that. So yeah, that's the main way everything functions here. And just to talk a little bit about what's going on in the editor, well, here's the app title that I've made, and we are on the first page of our app. It's an empty page. And all apps also have this thing called global canvas, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. It doesn't have a user interface, but it has uses when you want to do global logic things in the applications and so on. And then here in the middle, we have the view canvas, which is of course what is going to be built in the app view. So all the apps are made up of pages and then these like page views. And on the left, you have the view component library, which is this library here that contains all kinds of things. Like, for example, if we want a button, we just put the button on there, and then I can demonstrate that when I hit save, yeah, there's the button on the native application as well. And now it has animations and so on, so you can use it. And then for each of the components have properties. So for example, this paragraph component has this content property, and we can do things like this. So yeah, we can type into the properties and create things very quickly here. I'm just going to reset it with that paragraph. And that's the first parts of the UI. Here you also have this layout tree if you want a different way. Obviously you can also reorder components by just dragging them around and doing this kind of thing. And also, by the way, apologies for this little visual bug. It's because I'm having some problems fitting the phone preview and the browser UI on my glorious 13-inch MacBook screen. So bear with me on that. I guess I could show you a couple of simple things about like how the platform itself works, and then we'll go to actually building a very small example to demonstrate these things. And then I'm also going to show you how to integrate to an external data resource through a simple example. So as I said, here we have the components. You have all these different types of components. Some of the components are more complex than others. So you have these card components. I can show you that. It's made up of 2 different components. And then we have sliders, password fields, inputs, and all of these things. We're going to be playing with a couple of them soon. And then we have also these layout components, containers, rows, scroll views, and so on. And these core components, they're just like a selection of things that you will need often when starting out with an application. But then if we would visit the component marketplace, then there's quite a lot of different things that you can get from here. And what is quite exciting currently is that just before Christmas, we released a new version of the components that now allows us to do and allows really anyone to do their own custom components. But we can now do like these complex modules that are made out of different components, kind of like building so that you can use pre-existing components and make new ones of them and then put them out in the store. So that's an exciting possibility that we kind of spend a lot of time improving before Christmas and managed to roll it out then. And then aside from the components, we have variables, which do lots of different things. We have app variables, and the difference between these variable categories here is mainly the scope and the use case. They tend to work in the same way, and the types and everything works the same way. App variables are global to the application. They are created and initialized when the app starts and then exited once the app quits, and they're handy for storing things like user profile information and that sort of thing, something that you would need during the whole lifetime of the application. But then something that we usually when building Appgyver apps, we tend to work a lot more with is page variables. So these are page variables which work in the scope of the current page. So for example, now we are on our only page, which is currently titled empty page. And now if we create a page variable, it just puts it on this page. And then this variable is only accessible from the current page. And that's depending how much experience you have with computing this variable scoping is definitely a good thing to have. So if I would just, let's actually keep that name, since I'm just going to show you how to use this variable. And let's say our initial value here is simply hello there. So now we're going to be creating a variable that is named variable1, and the variable type is text. We have quite a few different types, and all the variables are typed to something. Although then we have this cheat type, which is called any value. So you can always do that if you want. But most of the apps that I think people are going to use are going to be of these three types. There's going to be text, true, false, and number, and then a little bit of object and list thrown in there. We're going to keep this as text, so I can just demonstrate how this works. So we're going to make this variable and give it an initial value of hello there. So now when the app starts, whenever the app starts, is the variable is going to be initialized, and then it's going to get that value. Well, how is this going to be useful to us? What you can do with each and every component and most other properties throughout the platform is I showed you that we can change this text, and that's all fine, but that's not really going to get us very far into creating interesting and compelling applications. Instead, what you do is you click on this binding icon, and if I hover here, you can see that it says it's currently bound to static text, which is the text that you see there. Now, if we would want to get our variable value here, on the other hand, we can click on this, which opens up the binding editor, which has all these different categories. And the default is static value, but now if we want to get to our variable, we can navigate into the data and variables category. And again, you can see, and by the way, it also displays this information that if these categories are available or not. Anyway, we're going to head into page variable, and then we're going to see our variable one there. And then we can also set a preview value for it while it's in the editor. So if I do this now, it's in the editor, it's going to show the preview value. And if I actually save the application and we look on the right, well, there we go. Now the variable is put into as the paragraph components content value. So now it's bound to that. And we can see that now it's bound to the page variable. So this goes a long way of explaining how these components work together with data variables and things. Then I'm going to show you another example of using some of the logic functions. So usually when you want to do something like a component that you would interact with is, for example, a button. So here we have a button, and this also has properties. We can decide the button label. We can set the initial status of the button, and then there's this. By the way, all the components have this property. The little demonstration of a more complex functionality in just a moment. But what we can do with the button is that we can go here in the bottom, we have this bar that says add logic to button 1, which is the name of this component now, since I just created it. And here it says on the arrow, open the logic editor. And if we do this, then we get this view that is called the logic canvas. And this is the other important part, aside from the components of the main editor features, is that for each and every component, now that the logic canvas is open, I can navigate between these. And as you can see, the logic canvas is then the logic canvas for whichever component I'm at. And also if I navigate away from any component, it becomes the logic canvas for the current page. So now we can see that for the current page by default, we have only one piece of logic by default, which is that when the page is mounted, that is to say, when the page has loaded and it's in your application, then we're going to hide the spinner icon. Now you didn't see it loads quite fast, so you can't really see the spinner, but let's say you have more complex logic or lots of variables or something like that, you would perhaps see the loading spinner. And this just does that it disappears after everything has been loaded. Going back to the button logic canvas, we can see that we have one event, which is the component tap event. So we can make something happen when the user taps the button. So one way of quickly demonstrating is this. We can use this kind of a quick demo that we just make an alert dialog, and let's just type in something to the title, and then we'll save. And now when I tap on the button, we get the alert with the thing. So these are the kind of the main things that you have. You have view components that have properties, you have variables in which you can store data, and then you have this whole library of components, and then also logic functions that these are called flow functions on our platform that you can use to cause different kind of logic flows to happen. And now these nodes are connectable, so we can have multiple things happening from this one event, or we can have things happening after the alert or before the alert, and we can construct this kind of visual programming things. And then there's one more kind of another set of function properties that I'm going to show how to use in the example. But with this out of the way, I think I've named kind of the main parts of the UI. I'm just going to show you how to build a kind of a mini application using these things that we just saw. So I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to save there. And then we'll just get rid of all these things. Well, let's keep the headline. It's always good to have a headline. So what I'm going to build is kind of this, just a little memo application that you can make some notes into, and then we can enter the notes into the application, and then we can get them out as a list, and just to sort of demonstrate these various concepts as one. So to start out with, I'm going to build the UI of the thing that we want to have. So we're going to have an input field for actually entering the new notes into this notes database. And then we're going to have a button for submitting them. And then we want to have a list of all the notes. So for that, I'm just going to use the paragraph element. And this is going to be a really simple application, but I'm only going to spend a few minutes building this. So with this, we can save, and that's the basics of our UI. So here we're going to enter the stuff, and then here's where we're going to list them out. And it's not looking like that yet, but that's soon going to change. Now, I mentioned that we're going to be storing some notes, and for that we need some sort of database to do this. And for this, we're going to head into the data tab here in the top. And from the data tab, it says no data resources added. So we need some sort of data resource. And if we navigate over here into the add data resources, we can see that there's a few different types of data resources we can do. We can do client-side storage, which means that we're going to save the things only on the current device, basically using the phone's local storage capabilities. We have a REST API direct integration. This is for all the use cases where you have an external API that can be connected with HTTP calls, and I'm going to demonstrate it after this application how to do something like that. And for now, we're going to use this one called Appgyver Cloud Storage, and it says here hobby use only, which means we mean that we've created this in order to kind of make it easier to create quick demos and things, because you don't always have a handy database available for that sort of thing. But at the same time, it's good to understand that this is not really like a fully featured database solution. It's quite simple. And also we don't really guarantee any kind of performance or something like that. So it's good for prototyping and kind of like finding your way with the platform, but it's not something you would want to use in a production scenario. We have a more back-end oriented product in the pipeline, and we'll be able to share more about it like during the next I would say 3 months. Probably you're going to start seeing some mentions about like how that's going to work. So we're going to call this the nodes resource. All this resource ID needs to be unique between the resources, and since we don't have any other resources, nodes is going to do fine. And then we can also enter a description for the resource. So I'm just gonna say this stores nodes. And then for the node, you can see here that the data model insists that we have an ID, which is a read-only parameter. So we can't remove this. We always need to have at least an ID when using the Appgyver cloud storage. But we can enter as many other properties as we like. And for the node, I would say we're going to enter a name, because then that allows us to say what the node is about. And then we're going to hit save. And then I really hope that the internet or anything else doesn't fail on me, because that we're so far doing well without any demo effects on this presentation. Okay, so we did that. So now we created the data resource for the nodes that we're going to store. Okay, so how we're going to use this with the actual app that we're going to build? How can we enter stuff in there? There's this other piece, and this is something that people sometimes find a bit confusing, but there's a good reason why this is kind of organized in this way. If we head into the variables tab, we can see that we learned about the app and page variable categories. Here below page parameters, there's a category called data variables. And this is the way the components are mainly going to access the data that we're going to work with. So if we look once more here, we're going to need two things to happen. We need this label, the input label, to be entered as the name of our node item and then be entered into the data storage. And then here we wanted to list all the node items out of the data storage. So we're going to have two data variables from our resource. We're going to have one that's going to represent the new items, and we're going to have another which is going to represent all the items from the database. So that's what I'm going to do here. Data variables are always created from a data resource. So if I press here, we get an add data variable, and then it lists out all our data resources, which in this case is nodes. And now I press the add data variable. We should give it a name. So first I'm gonna create the one that's gonna contain all the nodes that we're going to create. I'm just gonna call it nodes. And then there's three types that I can choose from. There's a collection of data records. So basically all of the records from the database. And you can apply different kinds of sorting criteria and things here if you want, but we're not going to do that now. And then we have a single data record, which would fetch a single data record by ID or some other property from the data store. And then we have a new data record. But for now, for this nodes resource, we're happy with that. We're going to get all of them as a collection. So that's fine. And then we're going to add another for the new data record. And this is a bit subtle why this is helpful doing it this way. But the reason why we would want to have a data variable for the new data record is that this is going to take the schema. So the schema is the ID and name properties from the data resource we just created. And now that we're creating this variable from the data resource, it means that the rest of the composer is now going to be able to understand that we're working with a resource that has ID and name properties. And that's what we're going to see soon, how that is helpful. Okay, so that's the data variables set up. And now we're going to work with the input field. And currently the input field, if I go here, I can focus on it and I can type on it, but nothing is going to happen since it's not bound to anything. It's just a static component. So the thing that represents what is typed into the field is this value field for the component. And here it says not bound to any value. And now we're going to change that by, again, opening up the binding editor, which is this screen. And then we navigate into the data and variables. And then we're going to go into, last time we went into page variable, but this time we want to go into data variable. And here we have the new notes variable. And here we can actually choose that we're going to bind it, which field we're going to bind it to. We're going to bind it to the name field because we want the content of the input field to be the name for the new node. And we're going to again set the preview value and so on. I'm actually going to remove the preview because then the UI can show us like where the input field content is bound. Okay, so that makes it so that now whenever we type into the input field, now since it's bound to the data variable, now the data variable is going to get that value. So we're going to have that stored as we type into the input field. Now the second part of this is posting it to the actual data storage out of here, and that's where this button comes in. So we're going to choose the button here, and then we're going to remember that we have the logic canvas here. And what we can now do is we can navigate through the flow functions, and we can find this data section here. And in the data section, we have these flow functions called get record and get record collection and create record. And we're going to take this create record flow function, and we see that it has two properties here in the properties panel. It has a resource name, which now defaults to nodes, since that is the only resource we have. And then it has record properties, which is a bit strange looking thing here. But the way it works is that it already knows that we want to post objects into the data resource. And now if we click on this custom object, we actually see that it already knows the schema of the data store. And now we can enter what the name is. But what is the name going to be? Well, since we are putting the name now into the data variable new nodes, we can go here and we can bind this just as we did before. We can bind this to the same data variable and the same property. So we're going to get, we're going to post an object with the new node's name. Now you might be asking, what about the ID? In this case, the ID is automatically handled by the Appgyver cloud storage resource. So it will, when we create a new record, it's going to assign it a new, like a unique ID. Okay, so we're going to do that. And then let's go ahead and save. So now if I would enter something here and press the button, it's gonna save it into the resource. But I have no way of, we don't have no way of seeing that at the moment. So the other part that we wanted to do is to list them out. So I'm just going to do it here and then demonstrate the whole thing straight through. We're going to take this paragraph element, and I mentioned this binding, this property rather, repeat with. What this allows us to do is to repeat, or if you're familiar with programming, you perhaps have heard of looping things or for each loops. This is kind of similar in concept. This is going to repeat the component based on some data set. And well, it feels natural that if we want a list of all the items in our database, then we probably would want to repeat this paragraph element for each of the items in the database. And we can do just that by binding this repeat with property to the other data variable we just created. That is going to, this notes variable is going to contain all the records that we are putting into the database. So we're going to bind it here. And you can see in the UI, let's get rid of that for the moment, that now it's signifying with this kind of ghost trail that now we are repeating the component based on some data. And it just defaults to this kind of four repeats just to show you visually that this is happening. And if we save, now actually from the preview, the paragraph vanished because obviously we have no items, like there's nothing to repeat, the number is 0. But if I go here and then I just enter something, this is usually what I enter myself into all the things that I'm testing, just this test strings. And then we press the button. It actually already saved it. I'll explain you in a moment what the slight delay is about. If this works. This is our first demo effect. I do have a working version of this in my back pocket in case I've missed something, but this should be, oh, haha, yeah, I figured. So important lesson, if you want your logic to work on component tab, you really must connect the nodes together, otherwise it won't work. So that's the missing piece there. So we want to connect this component tab event to the create record event. Okay, and now let's, by the way, every time I'm saving, it reloads the preview app. So that's why, which is very handy for testing. So now we're going to enter test, and now we should be getting some data into the database. There we go. Yeah, and now if we enter some other things, like let's say another, we can see now that since it's listing out the things, we're going to get as many paragraph repeats as there are things in the database. So already we've kind of created a thing where things are being entered and saved into a database, and we're running a native application. And I still have some time to talk about some other things too here. But this is not nice yet, since we're just getting these repeated paragraph elements. So there's another thing that we can crucially do with the repeating elements. And if we choose this one, we can see now that the content is again by default bound to static text. And we could bind it to a variable, but that's not really going to be any good, since each of the items are kind of separate items. So once we have a repeating component, we get this new category of bindings, which is called property of data item in repeat. So what this does, it enables us to access the kind of the current item in the repeat. So we can create these kind of repeating lists and structures. And if we click here, we can choose from the properties. And what we want to repeat is the name of the current item. So let's just choose that, and yeah, we'll find with that preview value. And now if we save, there we go. Now we have the names repeating in the list, and if I put here like another test with a different name, of course it would allow us to duplicate these. Yeah, and then since you've probably noticed this, it's kind of waiting around a bit to update those items. I'm just going to show you why that is and how you can actually change that logic as well. So one thing that I did not mention about data variables is that if we go into data variables and we select one, we can actually open up a canvas, logic canvas for the data variable itself. And this is the default logic that's happening under the hood for the collection of data records type. So when the page is mounted, we're going to get the record collection from nodes, and we're going to set it to the data variable nodes. And this causes that to happen. And by default, we have this kind of compromise between you know, getting into things and not making things too complicated. So this logic is basically running every 5 seconds. So that's why it took some time to kind of get the new items, because we have this 5-second window where the items are being repeated. And there's many cases where you want to adjust this or get rid of it, or get rid of the default logic, you know, completely, because maybe there's only data that you need to fetch once, and then you are fine working in the application. Or in this case, I would probably create some logic, you know, if this was a production app, then I would create some logic that we're going to get the list at the same time as when we're sending the new item there. Then we're gonna, like, after the save, we're gonna fetch the new list and do it properly like that. But we have these things in the platform that are meant to just, you know, keep things functional and not like bother you too much while you're developing things. But I just wanted to talk about that there is very little of this is working on any kind of behind the scenes magic, and most things can be traced back to this kind of like logic that you can edit and see yourself what it does. So that's the mini notes app. Then I promised you that I would talk a little bit about REST and data resources. So I'm just going to put a divider here and just do it below here on the same app. So a usual case for a mobile app these days is that you have an external data resource, usually an API. Like these days, almost anything has an API, and the case tends to be that you want to connect to that API and then build the applications and things around the API. This is the model that we've been operating for years and years already when building applications. And I'm going to demonstrate how to use just, you know, like, because previously here we saw that, yes, we can work with the Appgyver data storage and so on. And that's usually what, you know, most platforms are able to do. But what we really think that is great about platform is that you can take pretty much any data resource as long as it kind of adheres to the REST principles and has JSON data formats, then you can do integrate it quite quickly. And I'm going to show it using this API called REST countries. This is basically a simple API that is used to get countries, like a list of all the countries in the world, usually for, you know, those drop downs like choose your country and so on. And this is the REST countries main page. And then what we do is we go to the API endpoints and we discover that, aha, we can get all the countries by requesting this URL that is REST and then /v2 and all. And this is what we're going to take into the platform with us to get to be able to work with this country data in the platform itself. We just need this, and we're going to go back here. And now I'm going to go back into the data resources, and I'm going to add a new data resource, and that's going to be an REST API direct integration. And again, we're going to give it a name. REST countries, list of countries in the world is a good description here. And then we arrive into the first configuration element here that is concerned with the API itself. Is the resource URL. So we should give it the root URL of the API. And if we think about this URL, I would say the root is actually the v2. So that's the root URL of the API, because the all is parameter that gets us all the countries. So we're gonna be happy with that. And then we have these different methods that we can configure. Like this is easiest when you're working with an API that implements some or all of these methods. Not all APIs implement all the methods, but I would say usually you end up working with at least the get collection and get record methods. And since we were getting a list of all the countries, that means that we probably want to configure the get collection get method. So we're going to head there. And we can see now that we have our root URL here, REST countries and the v2. And then we remember from the API spec that, yes, the all endpoint was the one that's going to return us all the countries. And now, actually, with this configuration, we can already head into the test tab, and we can test this configuration. And yes, indeed, now we can see that we get the JSON for all the countries in the list here. And below the run test button, there's this button set schema from response. And what this does is that it looks at what the API returned. And if I press it, then it sets the schema from the API return, which means that now all parts of Composer, the editor, are able to use the schema as part of all the type hints and things. So now we can use all these properties. We can actually see the whole schema of the returned data here. So that each of the country items has let's see, there's a name, and then there's a native name, and then there's a numeric code and population of region and all of these other things. And that just says that the method is enabled. And that's actually all we need to do to configure this REST API integration. And so there we go. And maybe you've figured this already out, but I'm still going to demonstrate it, how we might use this simply. Again, I'm just going to demonstrate it with a paragraph element, is that if we want to get a list of all the countries in the application, we take a new paragraph element, and then we just head into the properties, take the repeat with property, and we're going to bind it to data and variables. Actually, I forgot one step. So we need to make a data variable to access the data here. So now we have in the data variables tab, we have two resources now, since we created the REST countries resource. And now we can create a new data variable from that. And I would actually call it list of countries. And this these types, they match the enabled and configured methods of the REST API resource. So by default, only collection and single data record are enabled, and for example, the new data record, which would be a post request to the API, is not configured and is not available. And again, this by default is right, collection of data records. So we can save. And now we have the data variable. And we can navigate to the data variables, and we can put here a list of countries. And again, now that I save, we're going to get a huge list of the paragraph elements, but quite quickly. So those are all the countries that we're now fetching from there. And to get some properties out of the country list, again, I can show you how to bind the paragraph element content, and we can head into the property of data item in repeat, just as we did with the other example. And now under the current, and this is because we pressed the set schema from response. Now we can directly here access all the properties of the API. Because one thing you need to remember is that while we are in the browser editor, this is not, of course, it's not making the requests live. So it's only making the request when we're pressing the test button, and then we need some way to remember the schema to be able to work with it, while the native app on here on the right is doing all the requests and things, but these are kind of separate pieces in that way. So if we just want to get the country name, and again, it already knows about the schema, so it can pick us quite representative preview values. So if we put that there, now it's like repeating the country name, and when we save, we get a list of countries here. So that's not like terribly many minutes to kind of get the data from an API into your application and be able to work with the data. So I think that's pretty fun. I'll show you one more piece of functionality. I think we still want to keep some time for some questions and comments and so on, because I would be eager to answer some of them. But I'm going to show you some one more advanced feature that we have. So of course, sometimes and many times it's fine to have these single properties and things named. But one thing that we often want to do is like, well, let's say you're building this application and then someone says, but hey, I don't want it to be the country name. I want it to be the country name plus the 3-letter country code, and it should be in brackets. And then you're like, but I'm working in no code. But then we as Appgyver says that no worries, we got you covered. We have thought about this. So the way to do something a bit more complex with this country name is that we head into the binding, and we can see that the content property currently is bound to the current name property. And yeah, we can change between all the properties here, but we still essentially only get one property. So that's not going to cut it in that case. For these kinds of things and many others, we have a different type of binding, one that I didn't mention yet. These are called formulas, and formulas look familiar if you've ever spent some, considerable time with, for example, Excel and done some things. So we have this thing called the formula editor, which has these more advanced formulas. And if I click here, I get what it, by default, I get the current .name property here. But what I also get, and I'll just show you some of the things that are available. So there's a huge library of these formula functions that you can use. So for example, if we would want to capitalize the value, we could use the capitalize formula function. Again, if you've like ever seen formulas in Excel or something like that, then these work exactly in the same way. But here, what we wanted to do is we wanted to work with the data from the API. So what we can then do is we can click on this variable category here. All the variables are available in the formula editor as well. Is we can take the currently repeated data item. Now we can again see all the different properties here. And the alpha-3 code was kind of like what we wanted. And again, this is working off the schema that was saved into the with these examples and everything. So I personally, I really like this feature because it makes working with REST APIs much easier when you can actually see what you're doing instead of like reading the documentation over here and then trying to implement it over here. Like getting these previews is excellent for me. So what we can do here is we can use the formula syntax, and this is kind of JavaScript light-ish. It's not JavaScript; it's our own formula syntax, but you kind of do with a little bit of knowledge from JavaScript. So the way you combine strings, like let's say if I would want to add something to the country name, is you use the plus sign and then you add something there. So if I would want to add 1 at the end, I would type plus and then quotation as and 1 there. But what we want to have is to have a bracket, and then, sorry, this is incredibly small screen for me on my end. And then we want to add the current alpha code, and then we want to also close the bracket. And yeah, let's put a little bit of air there. So we have that. So now we can in the preview see that this is now going to combine the current .name property, then put some brackets around the current alpha-3 code. And then what we get out is this like country name plus the alpha-3 code there. And it will show us that in the preview. So now we get, once it reloads, we are able to do this like customized list of things. And you can very quickly see that once you work with the components, like even though I think like at first impression, you might be like, but there's only a few components and things here. But really what we feel like is that if you have the essential tools, then you can make lots of things happen. And you can see that by using the components that we have, even the like just the existing ones without even going to the component marketplace, and by using some repeating logic and data resources and formulas, you can very quickly create some quite unique results that are like specifically for the use case in your own app. And I think with that, I'll wrap up this part, my part of this presentation, since we're, I think, almost at the hour, and then we have a time to do a few questions and so on. So yeah. Thanks everyone.
Thanks so much. That was brilliant. Would you mind maybe if you stop sharing your screen and then we can just see everything? Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'll just, by the way, mention that I'll show you just a couple of things. So yeah, you can go to appgyver.com, and the thing I wanted to say about this is that you can sign up for free, and unless you have 10 million in revenue, then it's free for you. So there's no entry fee for trying any of this out. And the other place that you want to go is our forums.appgyver.com, which has a lot of very active discussions and things about like the platform, and I hope to get anyone interested, on the platform and asking questions. But yeah, sorry, now I'll stop sharing.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so we have a couple of questions from the chat that I wanted to ask. So the first one was, is Appgyver meant for people with no background in coding, or is it meant for sort of coders who want to create their apps more quickly?
Excellent question. I say it's definitely meant for, and we think that it's definitely meant for anyone. It's definitely really useful if you have background, because then you'll be able to work with some of this terminology and things easier. But it's in no way I would say it's above anyone who wants to create apps, and even if they have no technical background. And I'm currently working on a kind of a video series that's hopefully going to make it even easier to pass into the kind of get in some of this terminology and concepts and things. But I think if you are going to seriously make applications and things, then you're just going to end up learning some computer science in the process. But we are trying to keep it as light and kind of fun as possible. But yeah, definitely I think it's for anyone.
Great. Maybe if, I'll get to some other. I think some other questions in the chat are probably more appropriate over email, because they look quite hefty. So maybe if anyone has got questions, just please raise your hand on Zoom or physically, and then I can come to you and ask away. Jason.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for that. That was a really good demonstration. I just have a couple of questions. One is, you showed a little bit about the client-side database. Is there an option, if people are offline with the app and entering data, to then synchronize that with another database, another external database via the API or something?
Yeah, so basically that's something. We have some client projects and things, and this kind of thing is quite common between the apps that are being built. And the way you set it up is basically you use the local storage, and then you use some bits of logic to fetch the things on app start from local storage, and then kind of see if the remote API is available. And you can customize that whole thing. It's you have to build some pieces, but it's basically connecting those logic pieces together, and it depends a bit on the specific situation. But yeah, there is.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Just one more question regarding databases then. So what databases do you recommend? Can you use Airtable, or does it need to be MySQL or something like that? Do you have any preferences of what to use?
I mean, it works with anything that has an API. So the problem with working with MySQL would be that doesn't by default have an API, like an online accessible API. But if it would, then that would work. I would say some products that I've seen working really well is probably Airtable. Backendless works really well. Zano works really well. Like if you've heard about this. Basically, like if you like the platform and it has an API and the API works well for you, then it's probably going to work really well with Appgyver also.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers, Jason. Who's next? Otherwise, I'll launch into some questions from the chat. So Luigi, Mark, have you got a question?
Sorry, yes, Max. I'm just wondering, how are you handling your help function? I know you mentioned there the videos, but are you doing other type of, I suppose, help functionality as well, to help no coders with no app experience or software?
Well, we have quite extensive documentation, and we have kind of this set of 25 onboarding videos as part of the platform that you can view, and you even get these kind of achievements for doing all the things there. And we have ways of measuring internally, like how sophisticated apps people are building, and perhaps like what kind of problem, what might be some of the problem areas. I'm myself working a lot with the video stuff, and I think our feedback indicates that people really kind of want to have the video content, and it's really helpful. And I think it's particularly useful since we're working with kind of visual program and lots of visual paradigms. So it can be a bit tricky to explain it with some kind of more text-based or static solutions. And as for other help channels, like we have tried to kind of invite everyone on the forums, and it's not just like a community forums in the sense that there's also our people, even the Appgyver CEO is sometimes on the forums answering people's questions. So we do take that part very seriously. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I've just got one question. I think it's quite a good one. Is around knowing what the limits of the composer plan are. So what limits are there to that, and what's the cost of the enterprise version?
First of all, addressing the limits. So basically, there are no expressed limits on what you can do. A lot of the services are provided, and we're able to provide them for free. And being that the end case tends to be that if you want to circulate and publish the apps, then you're going to do that on the App Store and the Android thing. So as far as our end of that, providing all the services and the platform up until the build, like that is always free. And the current plan is structured so that unless you have the 10 million in yearly revenue or funding, then it's free for you. And there is no plan to change that. Essentially, we'll be in the future adding some options around support and that sort of thing, but really in terms of like limits, there are none, and I think you can be very feel very safe using the platform as it is, because the business model is quite working in its current state. I hope that answers the question a little bit. But yeah, there's going to be probably I can't say when or which, but I think there are some pricing options planned around, but they're planned around support, not features as much. Or of course, if in the future we add some new features, then there might be some pricing related to that. But I have no like solid information on any of that to share.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really good context. Thanks for that. Has anyone got any more questions before we wrap up?
I just have one more quick one, just regarding authentication. What are the options for authentication? I saw for the app, did it have Google and Apple and
so we have on the authentication we have our own kind of, you get a pick of this third-party integration, which again you can integrate to some remote API and kind of a token flow that you want. That's something that is commonly done. And then we also have our own kind of out-of-the-box authentication, which has quite basic features, but if you just want to kind of limit people with password and login, then that works really well. It basically how it works, it just creates this layer where you have this default view that you cannot dismiss without passing the authentication, and then all the other pages are inaccessible until you've satisfied the login conditions. We don't have any authentication plugins out of the box on the like the free plan, but I'm sure eventually something like that will appear. But you can do your own stuff with the authentication feature.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Anyone for a last question? Before we, looks like not. Cool. Well, it's been really insightful, and I really appreciate the presentation today. I wondered if there's anything you'd like to leave us with or say before we close this up.
I just want to thank everyone for attending this. This was really fun for me, and I hope despite the slight time constraints, I was able to show you some interesting things and not talk too fast through all of it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing everyone on the platform. And I guess for this presentation, I'm just gonna put my Twitter handle on the chat, so you can give me a follow if you want to still send some questions or just see what's going on, and follow the official Appgyver account and so on. And if you have some questions, I'm also gonna put the contact@appgyver.com address there. You can send your questions in there. There might be some, we get quite a lot of mail, but we really try to also answer questions. So if yours isn't answered immediately, just be persistent and we'll get around to it. It's quite interesting handling, some of the inquiry and interest volumes as a kind of smaller company, but we do our best anyway. And we do want your questions and interest. So yeah.
Awesome. No, it sounds great.
Otherwise, I don't know. I'm very happy with this, and I hope you create some awesome apps and have a good time with our platform. That's what I hope.
No, appreciate it. Yeah, I'm sure we will, and lots of people look really enthusiastic about it. So yeah, excited to get involved and start using it. So thanks so much again. Thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully see you at next week's workshop or on Slack at some point. So have a good rest of your week and speak soon.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.